In this lecture, we are going to learn about trim methods which can be used on a string value. There are three trim methods in JavaScript which can be used to trim, that means remove spaces from start or end of a string. So we have trimStart, which removes white spaces from the start of a string. We have trimEnd, which remove white spaces from the end of the string. And we also have this trim method, which removes white spaces from both start and end of the string. Let's see these three methods practically. So here I have this string, and in this string you will notice that in the start I have a single space, and in the end I have three spaces. And I'm assigning this string to this full name variable. If I go ahead and if I log this full name in the console, let's log full name. If I save the changes, you can see those spaces in the result also. Now what I want is, I want to remove the space from the start of the string. This space is not required. In the full name, I don't want to have a space in the start. And for that, I can use trimStart method. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to create a variable. I'm going to call it, let's say, trim from start. You can name this variable anything. And on this full name, I'm going to use trim start method. And as we learned, this trim start method will remove any white spaces which will be there in the start of the string. And let's also go ahead and let's log the result. For that, I'm going to log this trim from start. If I save the changes, this is this string after removing the space from the start using this trim start method. As you can see, the space from the start has been removed, but the space in the end is still there. And this is the original string where there was a space before the string value and some space after the string value. So this trim start method has removed any white space in the start of the string. In the same way, we also have trim end method. So let me copy this. Let me paste it here, and I'm going to call this as trim from end. And here, instead of trim start, I'm going to use trim end method. If I save the changes, and before that, let's also log that variable which is storing the result. In this case, this trim from end. If I save the changes, you will see that this is the result returned by trim start. So in this result, the space has been removed from the start, and this is the string which is returned by trim end method. So you can see the space in the start is already there, but space from the end is removed. There is no space after the string that has been removed by this trim end method. And this is the original string where we had a space before the string and some spaces after the string. And you can also see that this trim start method and trim end method does not modify the original string value. Okay, it returns a new string value after removing spaces either from the start of the string when we use trim start method, or by removing spaces from the end of the string when we use trim end method. Both of these method returns a new string. It does not modify the original string. Now, if you want to remove string from both start and end, what you can do is, let me create a variable. Let's call it trim string. And here what I'm going to do is, on the full name, which is storing our original string, first I'm going to call trim start. So we want to remove the spaces from the start of the string, and this trim start, it is going to return us a string value. On that string value, I can again call trim end. So on the result of trim start, this trim end will remove any spaces which will be there in the result of this trim start. And now let me also go ahead and let me log trim string. So let's copy this console.log statement. Let me paste it here, and let me pass this trim string here. If I save the changes now, you will see that this is the result that has been returned by this expression. Okay, so the third log which we are doing here, that is trim string. It is storing the result of this expression. In that result, you will see that the spaces have been removed from both start and end. And to do that, what we have done is, we have chained trim end on the result of trimStart. Now we can achieve the same thing using a third method called trim. So let me copy this line. Let me paste it here. And here I'm going to call it as trim string new maybe. You can name this variable anything. And here instead of trim start and trim end, I'm going to call trim method. So what this trim method does is it removes spaces from both start and end of a string. And here, let me also go ahead and let me log trim string new. So I'll copy this, I'll paste it here, and I'll remove these two console.log statements, or I'll comment it, and I'll also comment this console.log statement. And here, I'm going to log trim string new. If I save the changes, you will see both of these results are same. In the first result also, which this trim string is returning, basically which this expression is returning, there also we do not have any space in the start or end because that has been trimmed by trim start and trim end. And the second result also, there also we do not have any spaces in the start or end of the string. So this trim method, it has removed spaces from both start and end of a string. And this is the use of trim method. So when you want to remove spaces from the start of the string, you can use trim start. If you want to remove spaces from the end of the string, you can use trim end. And if you want to remove spaces from both start and end of a string, you can simply use this trim method. Now, the actual use case of trim methods is, let's say you have a form where you are asking user to enter his details like the first name of the user, last name of the user, email of the user, etc. Now, while entering the form, the user might add some spaces before or after their name or email. But when you are reading those data from the form and when you are going to save it in, let's say, database, or when you are going to use it in the UI, before using it or before saving it in the database, you might want to trim any unwanted spaces before and after the string value. So there you will use this trim method or trim start method or trim end method based on your requirement. So I hope with this lecture now you know what is the use of trim methods in JavaScript. If you have any questions from this lecture, then feel free to ask it. Thank you for listening and have a great day.